Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today, we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. In this episode, titled Texas Ghost Towns Where the Dead Still Walk at Night, we'll explore places long abandoned, but never truly empty. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for 5 of the most disturbing true Texas horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight is just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. Most folks don't talk about Thurber anymore. If they do, it's usually in that hushed, sideways kind of way, like a man whispering about a bad dream he once had, one that maybe never ended. Back in the late 1800s, Thurber, Texas, was a booming coal town. Smokestacks coughing black into the sky, miners coughing black into their handkerchiefs, and the rail lines screeching in and out like clockwork. It was loud, dirty, and alive in the way only towns built on sweat and fire can be. Now, it's dead. And not just the ordinary kind of dead. No tumbleweeds, no sagging saloons, no kids playing with sticks in the dust. Just silence. A choking, endless silence, like the earth itself doesn't want to speak there anymore. But there are nights, strange nights, when the silence breaks. I know because I was there. I was stupid enough to go looking for ghosts in Thurber with my cousin Joel one August, back in 2006. We were both 22, both full of beer and bored out of our minds. And Joel had read something online about Thurber being haunted by miners who never made it out of the shaft during the fire of 1903. Said their bodies were never recovered, just buried under layers of collapsed tunnels and soot. That kind of thing sticks in your brain when you're young and itching for something weird to do. We drove out there at dusk, brought a couple of flashlights, and parked near the remains of the smokestack, the only thing still standing proud, casting a long, crooked shadow across the dusty ground. Everything else was bones, crumbling brick, collapsed beams, old rusted tools left, like the workers would be back any second. But they never came back. Joel kept cracking jokes, kept saying stuff like, "Yo, you smell that? Smells like ghost farts." Typical idiot behavior. I didn't laugh much. Something about the place felt off the second we stepped out of the truck, like the ground was listening. We wandered around the edges of the mine opening, now boarded up with iron bars. It was supposed to keep people out, but we noticed someone had bent them. Not like with a crowbar or anything, more like the bars had melted, then re-hardened. I touched one. It was warm. Joel shined his light down through the opening, and that's when we heard it. A dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through gravel. No wind, no animals, just that sound, slow and steady, like it had nowhere else to be. He started filming on his phone, of course. Idiot. The light caught on something down there, something wet. Not shiny wet, not water wet, but slick. Thick, blacker than the shadows. Then it moved, not walked, not crawled, it slid. Joel said, Holy sh! And then it lunged. We didn't see it clearly, not at first. Just a blur of smoke and heat. The air going suddenly so hot, my eyebrows curled. Joel screamed and dropped his phone. I grabbed his arm and pulled him back toward the truck. But the thing, it wasn't following us. It was watching. I felt its eyes, like cinders pressed into the back of my skull. We made it to the truck and sped off, dust flying behind us. Didn't stop until we were 2 towns away, parked outside a diner, panting and wild-eyed like we'd escaped hell. That would have been the end of it if Joel hadn't gone back. He never told me. Just left a voicemail 3 nights later. Said he couldn't stop thinking about it. Said the thing had spoken to him. That's the word he used. Spoken. His voice was shaky, full of static. He said, "I saw their faces, man. They're still down there, still burning." That was the last anyone heard from Joel. They found his truck near the smokestack. Keys still in the ignition, doors wide open. No sign of him. Not even a shoe print. But here's the worst part. And you won't believe me, but I don't care. The last time I went back to Thurber, years later, to try and find some kind of closure, I brought a friend. We stood near the mine, flashlights trembling, hearts racing. We didn't say a word, just stood in silence until we both heard it. The dragging, and then laughter. Not from a child, not from a ghost, from Joel. It was cracked and low, like his throat had turned to soot. But I swear on my life, it was him. Laughing down there, deep in the mine. Burning, still burning. And I don't know how long I stared into that darkness before my friend yanked me back. But I haven't been the same since. I dream of fire now. I wake up choking on ash. And sometimes I smell smoke in my bedroom, even when the windows are shut tight. Thurber's still out there, if you're stupid enough to go. Just remember, they never found the miners. Not really, because they never left. They walk at night, and they burn forever. Terlingua isn't a place you stumble upon. You have to want to go there, and even then, the road makes you pay for it. It's buried deep in the West Texas desert, close to the Rio Grande, closer still to the edge of nowhere. You drive for miles with nothing but scrub brush, bleached bones, and the kind of silence that presses against your windshield like a warning. There are no billboards, no radio stations, no cell signal. Just the wind whispering in that strange way it does out in the desert, like it's repeating secrets it was never supposed to hear. I came looking for stories. I was writing a book about ghost towns, the kind of thing you sell at truck stops and tourist traps. Terlingua was supposed to be the last stop. I'd heard it was spooky, sure. Dusty buildings, old mine shafts, a cemetery full of forgotten souls. But I didn't think much of it. I'd seen plenty of haunted places already. Most of them were more boring than scary. But Terlingua isn't like those other towns. You know you've arrived when you see the old church. It leans like a drunk with one leg shorter than the other. Its adobe walls weathered into scars. Around it are the ruins of homes made of rock and mud, roofs long gone, windows empty as eye sockets. And further up the hill, scattered like teeth across the jaw of a dying god, lies the cemetery. The town had once belonged to the mercury miners. Back in the early 1900s, hundreds of men came here to dig cinnabar from the mountains. It was hellish work. The fumes made them sick. The heat cooked their insides. Some went mad. Some simply vanished. When the mines dried up, the town did too. People packed up and left, leaving behind their dead. But some say not all of them stayed buried. The first time I visited the cemetery, it was late afternoon. The sun was still up, but barely. You could feel it starting to let go, turning gold, then red, as it dipped behind the Chisos Mountains. I climbed the path alone, past the burned-out ruins and rusted tools, and found myself surrounded by crooked wooden crosses, mounds of stone, and iron fencing so thin and twisted it looked like it had grown that way out of the ground. At first, it felt peaceful, the kind of quiet that only the desert knows, pure and deep, like standing at the bottom of an empty well. But then the wind died completely, like someone had sucked all the air out of the world, and I heard them, faint, so faint you'd think you imagined it. A whisper. No, it was more than one. Dozens, maybe hundreds, layered on top of each other, like a crowd murmuring in a forgotten language. I thought it was the wind at first, but there was no wind. Then I thought it was someone else. Maybe tourists, maybe kids playing a prank. But the cemetery was empty. The whispers didn't come from around me. They came from beneath. I knelt by one of the graves, a stone slab cracked down the middle like a broken promise, and pressed my hand against the dirt. It was cold. Too cold. The kind of cold that doesn't belong in Texas in June. Then I felt it, a vibration, tiny at first, like a heartbeat under the soil, and then stronger, like something was moving down there. I pulled back fast, heart slamming in my chest, and staggered to my feet. That's when I saw the first one, a figure, thin, pale, standing behind a stone cross, just watching me. I couldn't see its face, just the outline, long limbs, slight tilt of the head, like it was curious, and then it whispered. No lips moved, no throat flexed, but the voice was in my ears just the same, soft as breath and sharp as a needle. They never left. I blinked. The figure was gone. I told myself I was tired, that the sun and the heat and the isolation had messed with my head. I told myself all that and packed my gear up as quick as I could, heading back down the trail with the sun bleeding out behind me. I shouldn't have stayed the night, but I did. There's a motel near the edge of town, one of those places with swamp coolers and creaky beds and faded curtains that smell like mothballs and secrets. I locked the door, turned on every light, and tried to forget what I'd heard. But that night, the whispers followed me. They came through the walls, through the floorboards, through the thin desert air. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt them, begging, accusing, warning. My dreams were filled with dirt and shadows and fingers scraping at stone. I left before sunrise, but I couldn't forget. Something in that place had opened, and it didn't want to let me go. I went back weeks later, this time with equipment, cameras, recorders, EMF sensors, the whole ghost hunter setup. I wasn't alone either. I brought a friend, Eddie, a skeptic with a video blog who thought the whole thing was a joke. We camped near the cemetery, set up lights and microphones, and waited. For hours, nothing happened. Then, just after 2 a.m., the sensors lit up. The temperature dropped by 20 degrees in seconds. Our breath came out in fog. Eddie looked at me and whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded. It was starting again. The whispers rose up from the ground like smoke. This time, they weren't angry. They were pleading. Help us. Remember us. We never left. And then, all around us, the graves began to shift. Not dramatically, just a twitch of soil, a shuffle of rock, but enough. Enough to make us believe. Figures began to rise, not fully formed. Shadows in the shape of men, women, even children. They moved like smoke, like fog in reverse, dragging themselves up from where they should have stayed forever. Their mouths never opened, but the whispers poured out anyway. We ran, left everything behind, gear, tent, footage, all of it. None of it mattered. Eddie quit his blog. I stopped writing. But at night, in those moments just before sleep, I still hear them. Whispering, crying, telling stories no one will ever believe. Terlingua is still there. So are the graves. And they're still talking, waiting for someone else to listen. They say Indianola should have been the capital of Texas. Back in the 1800s, it had everything: wealth, trade, a deep water port, and enough ambition to rival Galveston. The Gulf Coast was kind to it until one September day in 1875, when it wasn't. A hurricane tore the place apart. Ships were thrown miles inland like toys, and houses were peeled open like fruit. Hundreds drowned, and those who didn't watched everything they knew wash out to sea. Most towns would rebuild. Indianola did, and the sea came back again, angrier this time, in 1886. That storm finished what the first one started. After that, Indianola wasn't a town anymore. Just wreckage, just bones, just a place on the map people stopped pointing to. But the dead never left. I first came across Indianola while driving the back roads near Port Lavaca. I wasn't looking for ghost stories. I wasn't looking for anything really, just a quiet place to think after the divorce. The map said Indianola had a beach, some ruins, maybe a few fishing piers. So I went. It's strange how a whole town can vanish, but the land still remembers. Indianola doesn't look like much now. Flat, grassy, a few houses, a general store that sells worms, beer, and sunscreen. But if you know where to look, you'll see what's left. Cracked cisterns, the outline of a courthouse, a rusted cannon from some forgotten war, and the cemetery, of course. That's the part they don't put on the tourist signs. It's half sunk into the ground, half covered in marsh grass. Some headstones are so eroded, you'd think they grew out of the earth that way. Others are still legible. Lost at sea. Taken by the storm. Drowned, September 1875. More than a few graves have no names at all. Just slabs, just dates, just sorrow. I parked near the beach and walked the ruins, trying to feel something. History, maybe. But what I felt instead was pressure. Like I was being watched. Not just watched, counted. Like something beneath the sand was tallying each footstep I took. I ignored it. Foolish. You learn later that it's never a good idea to ignore your gut on land soaked with old grief. I stayed in a little rental house, just off the shoreline, a squat place with hurricane shutters and the smell of old wood. The owner, an old man named Royce, handed me the keys and said, "Storm's not the only thing that gets loud around here after dark." He grinned like it was a joke, but there wasn't any warmth in his eyes. That night, I heard the waves talking. I don't mean crashing or rolling. I mean talking. Low, guttural syllables that rose and fell like a chant. I thought maybe it was the wind playing tricks on the dunes, or the breeze moving through broken slats. But when I stepped outside, the wind had died. The air was thick, damp, unmoving, and the ocean was glowing faintly under the moon. Phosphorescent, shimmering green, like something alive was just beneath the surface, watching. I didn't sleep well. The next day, I went back to the cemetery. This time, I brought my notebook. I was going to write something, make use of the trip. But I never made it past the gates. There was a man standing there, not near the graves, in them. His feet were on a cracked headstone, He wore soaked, tattered clothes, like he'd washed ashore and never dried. His hair was seaweed black and stuck to his cheeks. I should have asked him if he was okay, should have approached, but I couldn't move. He turned toward me, slow and deliberate. His eyes were pale, almost translucent, like glass that had spent too long in salt water. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He just opened his mouth, and water poured out. A stream, steady and cold, soaking the ground in front of him. And with that, water came the sound, not just a whisper, but a chorus. Screams, gurgles, sobbing, all layered together like they'd been trapped inside him for over 100 years. Then, he was gone. I stood there for a long time, my legs shaking, the notebook falling from my hands into the wet grass. I left it there. Royce didn't seem surprised when I told him what I saw. "Sometimes they show up," he said, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. "Storm season stirs them up. Ain't about haunting. They don't want revenge. They just want to be remembered." He told me about the old myth, how after the second hurricane, when the town finally gave up, there were still bodies buried under the debris. Folks never got the chance to dig them all out. And when the tide came back in, it brought the dead with it. "They say on moonless nights you can hear 'em knocking on your windows," Royce said, "begging to come inside, not to hurt you, just to warm up." I didn't believe him, not really. But that night, the knocking started. It was soft at first, just a tap-tap, like a loose shutter. Then it came again, louder, steadier, like knuckles on glass. I walked to the front window, heart thudding in my chest, and drew the curtain aside. No one was there. Then I heard it at the back window. Then the side. I stood in the middle of the room, turning in circles, hearing it come from all directions. And then, the front door creaked open on its own. Not a gust, not a slam, just a quiet, slow opening, as if someone had finally found the right key. The air inside turned wet, heavy. I could smell the ocean, brine and rot and rust, and from the open doorway stepped her. A woman, early 20s maybe, dressed in a gown that hung from her like seaweed. Her skin was bloated, pale, and split in places. Barnacles clung to her arms. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear words, just the rush of waves, like the tide was rolling in through her lungs. She pointed to the floor, and that's when I saw the puddle forming beneath my feet. Dark, oily water rising from the wooden boards, bringing with it the smell of drowned things. I ran, left everything behind, my clothes, my gear, my rental, just jumped in my car and drove until the sun rose. I told myself it was a hallucination. That stress and grief had broken me. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I hear the knocking again. It comes from nowhere, from everywhere. A few months ago, I read about a kayaker who disappeared off the Indianola coast. They found his boat drifting, half full of seawater, no sign of a struggle, just footprints on the shore, bare footprints leading toward the water, not away from it. They say the Gulf claims who it wants. I think Indianola still remembers its dead, and sometimes it wants to share them. If you go there, walk lightly. Don't touch the headstones. Don't stay near the water after dark. And for the love of God, if you hear someone knock, don't open the door. Barstow isn't a town that most people know for its ghosts. It's just another broken down speck on the map of West Texas, sitting where the railroad once mattered and the sun never forgives. It's hot, flat, and stubborn. The kind of place where time sticks, like old gum under a pew. Most of the buildings are empty now. Shells of gas stations, rusted out grain silos, trailers with curtains that haven't moved in decades. But the one thing that still turns in Barstow, always turns, is the windmill. You can see it from the highway if you're paying attention. It's tall, older than sin, perched on a little rise of hard ground just west of the ghost town proper. You wouldn't think much of it at first glance. It's just metal and wind, right? Just blades spinning in the desert air. But folks around Pecos and Monahans know better. They'll tell you the stories if you ask the right way, if you buy them a beer and let them talk long enough. They call it the Screaming Windmill. I didn't believe it either, not at first. I was writing a book on forgotten towns of West Texas. Barstow came up in a newspaper clipping about a flash flood that had drowned a schoolhouse in 1911. There were 22 children in that building. Only one survived. The others were never found, just washed away by the Pecos River, which ran black and wild for 3 straight days and then vanished like it had never been angry. The town never recovered. They say the schoolhouse was never rebuilt. Only the windmill nearby remained standing. It was a weird detail, sure, but I've seen worse. Places in East Texas where whole neighborhoods got swallowed by sinkholes, and the families still lived in trailers 10 feet from the edge. But something about Barstow stayed with me, especially the part about the noise. According to a story from 1967, the sheriff's deputy at the time reported a call about screaming heard near the windmill late one night. A group of teenagers had been camping nearby and came running to the station barefoot and bleeding, claiming they'd seen faces in the metal blades, screaming faces. The report said they were likely drunk, possibly high. But the deputy had one line in his statement that stuck with me. The screaming didn't stop when the wind died. So, of course, I had to go. I arrived in Barstow in late October, around dusk, perfect timing for spooking yourself. I parked near the edge of the town and walked the last mile in. The desert was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of dry brush and the buzzing of power lines that no longer carried power. The windmill stood where the old maps said it would, taller than I expected. It was rusted, but still turning, each rotation slow and strained, creaking like it had arthritis. A single wooden fence surrounded it, mostly rotted. I hopped over it like a fool, camera in one hand, voice recorder in the other. I set up camp about 30 yards from the base and waited for the sun to drop. Nothing happened at first, just wind and rust and the low hum of loneliness that fills these places. I jotted some notes, snapped some pictures, waited for the fear to crawl in. It didn't, until midnight. The wind stopped, completely. I noticed it because the creaking of the blades ceased. I looked up, expecting the windmill to stand still, but it wasn't. The blades were still turning, slower now, smoother, not driven by wind, but by something else, something inside, something old. And then the screaming started. It didn't come all at once. It built, like a choir tuning up in hell. First, I heard the sound of children laughing, not happy laughter, but the kind you hear before something breaks. Then came the cries, high, panicked. Screams of drowning, screams of confusion, of betrayal, of small lungs filling with dark water. I turned on my recorder, but it wouldn't work. The red light blinked once and went black. My flashlight dimmed like it was running out of batteries, though I'd changed them that morning. I stood frozen, watching the windmill turn without wind, the blades slicing through the night like knives. And in each turn, I saw faces, children's faces, their mouths wide open, eyes wild, some reaching, some clawing, some simply staring into nothing. They flickered in and out of the metal like reflections on a dirty window, and every time the blades turned, the screaming grew louder. I ran, didn't even pack my gear. I sprinted back toward the car, my boots thudding against the cracked ground, heart pounding like a drum. The desert didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of water, full of voices, full of them. I don't know how I made it back. I don't remember unlocking the car, don't remember starting it. I just know that when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the windmill still turning behind me, and I could still hear the screams, even over the engine. I returned the next morning, under clear skies and calm wind. My tent was still there, ripped open. My camera lay cracked in the dirt. My notebook was missing, but the windmill kept turning, silent now, harmless. I asked around town again. This time, I met an older woman in Pecos who once taught history, back before the schools shut down. She told me something that still chills me. The children in that old schoolhouse. They did not just drown, she said. They were trapped. The flood came fast. The teacher tried to save them, but the front door was stuck. They beat on the walls, but the windows had bars. She tried everything, but nothing worked. The guilt broke her. 2 days later, she was found at the windmill. I asked if anyone ever recovered her body. They found her, she said, but not all of it. She said nothing more. She did not have to. I left Barstow that same day and never returned. But at night, I still hear things. A windmill creaking when the air is still. Distant echoes of voices underwater. And sometimes, I wake up with my sheets damp and a strange taste in my mouth, like river water. If you ever pass through West Texas and see a windmill spinning in stillness, do not stop. Do not listen. And if you hear anything unusual, keep driving. Some things out there never stop moving, and some cries never fade. Marlow was a town built on silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Dusty streets, empty porches, and a handful of cracked windows, looking out over the flat, dry land. You could drive past and never think twice, except for one thing, the whispering pines. The pines stood just outside town, a dense, dark forest of twisted trunks and thick branches that seemed to claw at the sky. Old-timers said the trees weren't right, that they were older than Marlow itself, that something ancient lived in their shadows, the kind of thing that whispers to you when no one else is listening. The first sign something was wrong came with Old Man Jenkins. Jenkins was the kind of man who never missed a chance to remind you he owned more land than anyone else. A retired rancher with a face like weathered leather and eyes sharper than a hawk's. He didn't take kindly to trespassers and kept a shotgun by the door, though no one ever really saw him use it. One October night, when the wind was whipping the desert dust into swirling storms, Jenkins was seen walking toward the whispering pines. He didn't answer when his wife called, didn't come back inside. By morning, his truck was parked at the edge of the forest, doors wide open, engine still running. But Jenkins, gone. No footprints, no blood, no sign he ever stepped beyond the trees. The sheriff and a handful of men searched for days, but the pines kept their secret. Some said they heard Jenkins screaming from inside the forest that night, but when they followed the sound, there was only the low, rustling whisper of the pines. Then, the kids started to change. Marlow Elementary had a handful of students, Kids who grew up hearing the stories about the pines but never believing them. Every day, the bravest would dare each other to run to the edge and touch the whispering giant, a massive pine that towered over the others, its bark scarred with old carvings nobody could explain. Tommy Moore was the first to truly hear the whispers. After touching the giant tree during recess, he stopped playing with the other kids. He sat alone, staring off into the woods, whispering strange words no one recognized. "I have to find the lost," he said one afternoon, voice barely audible. That night, Tommy had a nightmare so vivid, he woke screaming. He described a dark forest filled with glowing red eyes, hands reaching for him, voices calling his name in an old, broken language. After that, he stopped speaking. The next morning, Tommy was found wandering near the pines, clothes torn, hands scratched raw. His eyes were empty, hollow, like the trees had reached inside him and taken something away. When asked what happened, he only whispered, "They're waiting." The sheriff found strange symbols carved deep into the trees around where Tommy was found. Circles, lines, spirals. Nothing anyone in Marlow recognized. Some thought they were native markings. Others said they looked like warnings. The town grew uneasy. Parents kept their kids inside. The school canceled recess near the pines. But curiosity is a hard thing to kill in kids. One of those curious souls was Mara Ellis, the school librarian. She was a quiet woman with a love for old books and a stubborn streak. Mara didn't believe in ghosts or curses. She believed in answers. One night, armed with a lantern and her notebook, Mara stepped into the whispering pines. She wanted to understand the whispers, to prove there was a logical explanation. Hours passed with no word from her. At dawn, the town found her lantern smashed beneath the whispering giant. Her notebook lay open nearby, pages filled with frantic writing. "They are waiting. The lost must come home." Her last note was a shaky drawing of a figure, a small boy with hollow eyes, reaching out from between the trees. Marlow was done with the pines after that. The few remaining townsfolk avoided the forest as best they could, but the whispers never stopped. Some nights, when the wind blew just right, people swear they hear a child's voice calling their name, soft but insistent, like an echo from a place that shouldn't exist. Old Man Jenkins' wife moved away. Tommy Moore was sent to live with relatives in another state. Mara's house stood empty, its windows dark and broken, and the whispering pines keep standing, silent watchers of a town that forgot how to listen. If you ever find yourself near Marlow on a windy night, stand at the edge of those trees. Close your eyes. Maybe you'll hear the whispers too. Maybe you'll hear the call to come inside. But be warned, once you answer, the pines might never let you go. There's a place on the I-10 out in West Texas where everything starts to feel weird. Like the desert's been watching you for a while and just now decided to blink. Most people pass right by it without stopping. And they're lucky. Because if you do stop, if you take the wrong exit near mile marker 108 and follow that narrow heat-blistered road south a mile and a half, you'll find yourself in Lobo. Lobo's not much of a town. Wasn't ever. It's more of a dried-out hiccup in the middle of nowhere. A few gutted trailers, a boarded-up cafe, the ruins of a once-decent motel, and a single gas station with a hand-painted sign that reads, "Eat here, get gas, make time." You might think that's just old desert humor, but it's not. I stumbled onto Lobo by accident back in the summer of 2012. I was driving west from El Paso. heading for a ghost town in New Mexico to do research for a book that never got finished. The heat had gotten to me, sleep-deprived, half delirious, with the kind of sunburn that makes your skin feel like it's buzzing. The gauge on my rental said I had less than a quarter tank, and I hadn't seen another car for over an hour. When I saw that crooked little sign with gas painted in red, I took the exit like a starving man sniffing food. The road into Lobo felt off. It was paved once, maybe 30 years ago, but now it was all cracks and soft gravel, like the desert had been trying to swallow it back up. There weren't any birds, no bugs even, just the dull hum of your own breath and the sound of your tires kicking dust. The gas station stood alone, like a scarecrow in a dead field. One pump, old school, metal handle, no digital screen, just a dusty dial under a sun-bleached plastic shield. The building behind it looked like something out of a 60s postcard. Flat-roofed, stucco walls the color of weak tea, and a Coke machine out front that looked like it hadn't vended anything since Nixon was president. But here's the thing. The place had power. The humming neon open sign was flickering in the window. There was a faint light inside, and the pump said, "Ready." That should have been my first warning. I got out, and the heat hit me like a wet towel, dipped in motor oil. I swore I heard something, a soft ticking sound coming from the ground, like an old watch buried in the dirt. I pumped the gas anyway. Took longer than it should have. The numbers on the dial moved slow, like syrup, and I could have sworn they ticked backward once or twice. Then I went inside. The moment I stepped through that door, I felt like I'd walked into a memory I didn't recognize. The air was thick and still, like a basement. There were shelves of snacks, Slim Jims, Pringles, stale Twinkies in faded plastic. But none of them had dates. No expiration, no brand logos, just plain packaging like old government rations. A radio behind the counter was playing some kind of warped country song, the kind where the singer's voice drags like a cassette left out in the sun. The guy behind the counter was tall and wiry, skin like wax paper stretched over coat hangers. His name tag said Jack in red embroidery. His eyes didn't match. One was a normal hazel. The other was milk white and didn't blink. He smiled like he'd been waiting for me. "Fill you up?" he asked. I nodded, still trying to figure out why I felt so heavy. My hands were cold even though it was over 100 degrees outside. My watch said 3:47 p.m. when I walked in, but the old clock above the register said 11:12. "You look tired," Jack said. "Why don't you grab a cold drink?" "Take a minute." I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler, though the moment I twisted the cap, the water turned warm. Not warm like the sun had hit it, warm like bathwater, like it had been waiting. "Where am I exactly?" I asked. "Lobo," Jack said, smiling too wide. "Always has been, always will be." That's when the humming started. Not the radio, the floor. A deep, buzzing vibration that came from under the building, like something alive was turning over in its sleep. I backed toward the door, and Jack didn't follow. He just stood there, one hand on the counter, the other slowly tapping a rhythm on his thigh. I got out fast, threw the water in the dust, and jumped into the car. The second I turned the key, the engine sputtered like it was waking from a long nap. The gas gauge read full, but my hands were shaking. My watch still said 3:47. Then I looked at the dashboard clock. It said 7:58 p.m. I drove like hell, didn't stop until I hit Van Horn. When I got to my motel, I flipped on the TV, and that's when the panic really set in. It was August 8th when I left El Paso. The TV said August 10th. I'd lost 2 days, 2 full days. I checked my phone. Dead. No signal. I turned it off and back on. Still nothing. When it finally came back to life, all my apps were logged out, my texts were gone, and my last GPS ping showed me still near El Paso, 48 hours ago. I went back once, just to prove to myself it hadn't been heat stroke or a hallucination. Lobo wasn't there. I drove that same road, and it led straight into a tangle of mesquite and sand. No sign, no gas station, just cactus and silence. I walked around for hours and found nothing but a single rusted pump buried in the dirt, half swallowed by the earth. That night, I dreamed of Jack behind the counter, still tapping that rhythm on his thigh. Tap, 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 like a clock counting down. Since then, things haven't been the same. I don't sleep more than a few hours at a time. My hair turned gray in a year. I get nosebleeds when I pass mile marker 108. And sometimes, I hear a low hum beneath my feet, like something is still ticking away time beneath the desert. They say places like Lobo exist in the cracks. They're not on maps because maps are for the living, but they wait. They feed, not on blood, not on fear, on time. So if you ever find yourself on I-10, baking in the West Texas sun, and you see a sign that says, "Make time," don't stop, don't get gas, don't go inside, because time isn't something you lose in Lobo. It's something that gets taken. Belle Plaine isn't even a dot on most Texas maps anymore. You'd blow right past it going 70 on FM 586 and never know it was once supposed to be the next Dallas. Back in the late 1800s, they had big dreams: railroads, schools, a university, brick streets. But dreams rot fast in the dry heat. By the 1930s, Belle Plaine was a graveyard of busted buildings and fading hope. The only thing still standing is the old Belle Plaine College bell tower. 4 stories of sun-baked limestone and ivy, with a rusted cross crooked at the very top. And inside that tower, they say she still waits. They call her Sister Magdalene, the nun in the clock tower. She was real once, back when the town was still breathing, taught Latin and piano at the college, wore her black habit-like armor, never smiled unless she was with the orphans. People said she was kind but strict, the kind of woman who kept a ruler in one hand and a Bible in the other. But behind her back, they whispered things, said she wasn't right in the head, said she talked to the tower, said she wandered the cemetery behind the school at night, kneeling at the graves, like she was having conversations with the dead. Nobody wanted to believe it until the children started disappearing. It happened slow at first. A little girl gone from her bed. A boy vanished while playing in the courtyard. Then another. No signs, no ransom notes, no tracks in the dirt. Just vanished like smoke in the wind. The townsfolk blamed drifters, wild animals, maybe Comanche raids. But Sister Magdalene kept on smiling, kept on praying, kept teaching those hymns in that cold, echoing chapel. Until one night, in the spring of 1891, the town doctor caught her dragging a burlap sack across the graveyard under the moonlight. Said the sack was moving, said it was whimpering. He never made it home. The next morning, they found his satchel near the tower steps. The sheriff and a few good men stormed the place, kicked in the chapel doors, went up into the clock tower, where she lived in a tiny cell just beneath the bell gears. What they found made 2 of them vomit right there on the floor. The walls were covered in Latin prayers, scratched in blood and soot. Dolls made of bone and hair hung from the ceiling, a child's shoe in the corner, and Sister Magdalene kneeling by the window, humming a lullaby and stroking a long black rosary made of teeth. She didn't fight, didn't scream, just turned to them with hollow eyes and said, "He promised me music." They never made it to a trial. The sheriff dragged her down the stairs, out into the square, tied her to the base of the tower, and lit the fire himself. She didn't cry, didn't beg. She only whispered, "He will ring the bell for me." The flames touched her, and just as she began to burn, the clock tower rang out. Once, twice, 3 times, even though the gears were rusted and the weights hadn't worked in years. Then the fire burned her clean. The tower was sealed up after that. The town emptied out within the decade. Belle Plaine became a name only historians knew, the kind of place ghost hunters visit when they're desperate for footage. But the stories never stopped. They say on certain nights, when the moon is thin and the wind moves like a whisper, you can hear the bell toll again. Not 12 times, just 3. They say if you hear it, you're marked. Sometimes it's hikers, sometimes it's teens on a dare, sometimes it's just a lonely old man out for a walk. Doesn't matter. They always vanish within 3 days. Clothes found folded at the base of the tower, shoes neatly side by side, rosary beads tucked in their pocket. And the tower, still sealed, still standing. But now the ivy grows faster, the stone bleeds rust, and if you stand too close, you can hear someone humming up there, a lullaby, soft and broken, and sometimes, just sometimes, you'll catch a glimpse of her. A figure in black, staring from behind the cracked glass of the clock face, lips moving in prayer, her eyes empty as the desert sky, waiting, smiling, listening for the bell. There's a dead silence in the town of Helena, Texas, the kind of silence that hums if you listen too long, a silence that's alive somehow. Not the peaceful kind either. No birds, no dogs barking, no wind pushing through the trees, just heat and dust and the weight of something old that never moved on. It's easy to miss Helena now. You take a side road off Highway 80 and drive until the pavement cracks into gravel, then gravel into dirt. There's a historical marker, all polite and gleaming, that talks about Old Helena, once the county seat, now a ghost town of heritage and legend. It doesn't mention the hangings. It sure as hell doesn't mention the playground. I found Helena because of a story my grandfather told me when I was a kid. He was the kind of man who didn't scare easy, fought in Korea, lost 2 fingers working oil in East Texas. But he wouldn't go near Karnes County after sundown. He'd say, "That's hanging judge territory, boy, and that man don't sleep." I thought he was just trying to keep me out of trouble, but now I know better. Judge Odlum, a name you won't find in many books, but folks in South Texas used to whisper it like a curse. In the 1870s, he ran Helena like his own private hell. Didn't need juries, didn't need laws. If he thought you were guilty, he'd have you swinging from the gallows by sundown, sometimes by lunchtime. And he liked to watch, always with that black hat and polished boots. Legend says he smiled every time the rope snapped tight, and he always brought children to watch. Said it taught respect. They buried him in Helena when he finally died. Heart attack at 73, right in the courthouse during sentencing. His last words were, "Hang 'em all." They say the noose he kept in his office was wrapped around his chest in the coffin, like some folks hold a Bible. But the thing is, the hangings didn't stop when he died. Fast forward to 2006. I was a freelance writer, doing a piece on forgotten Texas towns. the kind of sleepy places with broken-down churches and war memorials nobody visits. I was driving through Karnes County and saw a wooden sign for Helena, painted in chipped red letters. Population? None. History lives here. I parked outside what used to be the courthouse, now a museum. There was a caretaker, old woman with wild gray hair and skin like burnt leather, who didn't smile when I asked about the judge. She said, "The town remembers. Best be gone before dusk." I stayed anyway. The museum was dusty, with faded flags and glass cases of antique pistols and rusted manacles. In one corner was a child's swing, made of thick hemp rope and a wooden plank seat. The tag said, "Crafted from salvaged gallows timber, original to Judge Odlum's era." I leaned in closer and saw small carvings in the seat, names scratched in rough letters. Some were dated, some weren't. One said simply, "He watches." I swear the room went cold as I read it. Not a sea cold, deep ground cold. Like the inside of a cellar that hadn't been opened in 100 years. I heard something then. A creak. Not from the floor or the door, but from above. I looked up and saw nothing, but I felt it, like someone was standing behind me. I left the museum, shaken, and wandered the town. The buildings stood like old bones, sun-bleached and brittle. The church had no doors. The saloon was just a frame of beams and rusted nails. I found the judge's house too. 2 stories, still half standing, though the roof had collapsed in the back. The swing was out front, not a child's swing, a gallows beam, still upright, still strong. No rope, but the hook was there, waiting. That night, I made camp in the car, parked beneath a dying oak. I planned to leave at dawn, but sleep didn't come. Around 2 a.m., I heard a noise, creaking, like a heavy weight on a rope, and then a thud, then another, rhythmic, a swinging sound. I got out of the car and followed it, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. The sound came from behind the judge's house. A playground stood there, a playground I hadn't seen during the day. Swings, seesaw, carousel, all made from gallows wood. The swings were hung with rope too thick for children. One of them moved on its own, back and forth, slow and steady. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw them. Children, silent, standing, eyes black as oil and wide as silver dollars, watching me. Some sat on the seesaw. One pushed the merry-go-round, slow, without touching it. Their skin was pale and dusty. Their clothes wrong, too old, too perfect, like dolls. Then I heard the boots, a slow, measured stomp on dry ground. Black boots, polished. He stepped out of the darkness like he'd just come back from a stroll. The hanging judge, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in old black robes that didn't move in the wind. He didn't have a face, not really. Just shadows and the faint impression of eyes that didn't blink. He pointed at me, and I ran. I don't remember the drive, just that when I reached Highway 80 again, the sun was rising, and I'd chewed my lip bloody. My watch was frozen at 2:18 a.m., the exact moment I heard that first creak. Weeks passed before I dared talk about it. I looked up Helena's graveyard records, found names matching those on the swing in the museum. Children, all dead in the 1870s and 1880s. Natural causes, the record said, but I know better. People say ghosts haunt places of trauma, but some places become the trauma. The judge didn't just hang people. He made death into a game, a lesson, and now it's still being taught. The playground's still there, still waiting for more students. Every year, 1 or 2 folks go missing near Helena. Hikers, teenagers, history buffs. Their cars are found with the keys still in the ignition, doors wide open. No sign of struggle, just gone. The sheriff calls it bad luck, maybe coyotes, but I've seen the children. I've seen the swing. I've heard the creak. And every now and then, around 2:18 a.m., I still hear boots on my porch. The hanging judge walks, and his playground's never full. Langtree, Texas, is a town that remembers more than it should. It clings to the edge of the desert like something buried too shallow, bones poking through the dust. On the map, it's barely more than a name, but the sun hits it just right sometimes, and you can still see the shape of what it used to be. Dirt roads lined with dying brush, stone ruins baked brittle by 100 summers, and the old courthouse with its warped boards and leaning frame, stubborn as a sinner in Sunday service. The locals, the few who still live within shouting distance of the place, say the wind doesn't blow right in Langtree. They say it hums, low and slow, like it's carrying voices too old to name. Most of them keep their distance. Too many stories, too much blood. The courthouse is the heart of it, an old wooden structure that looks like it's held together by memories and termites. It's got a weather-beaten sign that reads, Judge Roy Bean, Law West of the Pecos, carved in crooked letters. Tourists still come by now and then, mostly history buffs or road-weary travelers looking for something weird to post online. They walk around, take photos, maybe sit on the bench where Bean used to rule with whiskey breath and a loaded pistol in his lap. They laugh at the past, the kind of laugh people give when they don't know what they're standing on. The bench looks normal at first, a little darker than the rest of the room, glossy almost, like the wood soaked up more than just sweat and tobacco. There's a dark stain on it, reddish, like rust, but deeper. People say it's just age. People lie to themselves all the time. It started in 1903. That was the year Judge Bean died, slumped over in his saloon-turned-courthouse, a bottle in one hand and a worn Bible in the other. They buried him with a kind of respect he never gave anyone else. But the ground didn't take kindly to him. Things changed after that. The town wasn't big then, maybe 60 folks total, and everyone knew everyone else's secrets. The sheriff's son, Danny Harwood, was the kind of boy that made dogs bark and girls keep their eyes down. 17, spoiled, cruel, in that quiet way that always gets worse with time. He claimed a young Mexican boy, Emilio Vargas, stole his father's horse one night. Emilio was 14, poor, and lived with his grandmother in a shack by the river. He'd been helping around town, mending fences, running errands, cleaning stalls, for pennies and scraps. Everyone liked him. Everyone knew he wouldn't steal. But in Langtree, Roy Bean's word was law, and the law didn't listen to boys like Emilio. They brought him into court the next morning. He was bruised from the arrest, probably Danny's work. His lip was split, and he kept wiping blood on his sleeve, blinking hard to stay strong. He stood there in front of Judge Bean, who was already drunk and didn't bother to read anything. He just looked at the boy, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Hangings at dawn." No trial, no witnesses, just the creak of the bench and the laughter of Danny Harwood echoing through the hot, still air. That night, something moved through Langtree. Something wrong. The old Mexican women said prayers and lit candles, whispering about la sangre maldita, the cursed blood. They said you could feel it in the dirt, said the spirits were stirring. No one listened, but the town dogs wouldn't stop barking, and the wind blew backwards. At dawn, They came to Emilio's cell to take him to the noose, but he was already dead. No marks, no wounds, eyes open, lips pulled wide into a dry, unnatural scream. His fists were clenched so tight that blood seeped from beneath his fingernails, even though no one ever found a wound. That was the first time the bench bled. The sheriff came in to tell Bean the boy was dead, found the judge still asleep in his chair, or so he thought. When he got close, he saw the judge's eyes open, just slits, but open, and his tongue, black and swollen, stuck between his teeth. His hands were curled around the arms of the bench, like he was trying to pull himself into the wood. Blood trickled from beneath him, soaking into the grain. 3 days later, Danny Harwood disappeared. They found him hanging from a mesquite tree a mile out of town. His neck was snapped backwards and his eyes were gone. Carved into the bark beneath his swinging feet were the words, "He lied." Then came the bartender, who testified against Emilio, drowned in a dry horse trough, his lungs full of dirt and gravel, throat packed with tiny pebbles. Then 2 of the men who sat in the court that day. One was found burned alive in his own home, though the fire never spread beyond his chair. The other was found face down in the Pecos, skin covered in bite marks no one could identify. And through it all, the bench stayed. They tried to sand it, tried to paint over it. One man even tried to chop it to pieces, but his axe splintered and he lost 3 fingers. The stain always came back, darker, wet to the touch sometimes, though no one ever saw it drip. One man swore he saw the wood move, like it was breathing. The town died slow after that. One by one, the shops closed, the houses emptied, people left, but the bench stayed. The courthouse stood, and the bench remained right where it had always been, at the center of the room, waiting like a throne in a forgotten kingdom of ghosts. And Langtry never forgot. Some say it's not the bench. Some say it's what was done there, that the law twisted into something hungry, something that needed more than justice. It needed penance. Others say it was Bean himself, that he didn't go to hell when he died, that hell came to him, took root in his seat, grew teeth. Now and then, a curious soul wanders in. A grad student maybe, a blogger, someone chasing folklore. They sit down, take a photo, make a joke about ghosts, and then they start dreaming. Dreams of dry riverbeds full of bones, of gallows swinging in the dark, of whispers behind their teeth, a voice not their own saying the same phrase over and over. He lied. Some of them wake up screaming. Others don't wake up at all, just vanish. And the bench? Still there, still stained. There's a story of a woman named Claire Sandoval. She was writing a book about old Texas justice, spent a week in Langtry, interviewed locals, took photos of the bench, sat on it once, just to feel what it was like. She told her husband over the phone that she was having strange dreams, and then she stopped calling. When they searched for her, they found her car, found her notes, found her recorder, but no Claire. Only thing left behind was a single shoe, placed neatly on the judge's bench. Blood on the heel. People talk about tearing the place down, but it never works. Construction crews refuse to touch it. Tools go missing. Accidents happen. One man fell off a ladder and broke both legs trying to board up the windows. Said something cold grabbed his ankle. Said it whispered in his ear, "The trial ain't over," and it never will be. Because Langtry remembers, and the bench remembers, and whatever's inside that courthouse, whatever's soaked into the wood and breathes in the shadows, it doesn't forget. It wants truth. It wants blood. and it wants someone to sit and listen, just long enough for the old law to open its eyes. So go ahead, sit on the bench, laugh, take your pictures. But when the air gets cold and the wind starts blowing backwards, when you feel that pressure in your chest and the shadows behind the judge's seat begin to move, remember this. In Langtree, the law still lives, and it wants you next. They say the old roads remember, not the big wide interstates buzzing with Teslas and semis, but the broken highways, the veins and arteries America forgot. Route 66 is one of them. Once called the Main Street of America, now it's just a brittle scar stretching through ghost towns and dust bowls, cracking under decades of sun and silence. And there's a stretch near the Texas-New Mexico border, right near Glen Rio, where the road doesn't just remember, it watches. People don't talk about Glen Rio anymore. Not locals, not travelers. You can drive through and never even know you passed it. A skeleton of a town. No gas, no lights, no signs worth reading. Just a handful of buildings, baked hollow and rotting under the desert sun. But if you stop there, especially after dark, and you leave your engine off for too long, it notices you. I was 29 when I drove through, freelance photographer chasing the ghost of Route 66 for a photo essay nobody asked for. I had an old Nikon, a notebook, and enough self-loathing to think sleeping in a rental car was romantic. I'd been on the road for 2 weeks and hadn't seen anything worth writing about since I passed Amarillo. I hit Glen Rio around sunset. The sky was blood orange, and the horizon looked like it was on fire. I saw the shell of a Texaco station first, its sign bent like a broken cross, then the diner. Little Juarez Cafe, the faded paint claimed, though its windows were dusted over and spider-cracked. The wind howled through the cracked windshields of dead cars, like it was trying to whisper something in a language no one speaks anymore. The sun dropped quick, like it does in the desert, and suddenly I was alone in a dead town. The headlights of my rental, the only light for miles. I parked across from the motel. The State Line Inn, it said. The O was missing. It was one of those rare places that sat exactly on the border between Texas and New Mexico. Literally. The state line ran through the middle of the parking lot. I was setting up a tripod to get some dusk shots when I noticed it. Movement. A shape in the window of the second floor of the motel. Just for a second. A silhouette. Tall, stiff, unmoving. I froze. Maybe it was my own reflection. Maybe a trick of the dying light. But then it was gone. Like it had stepped back into the shadows. I told myself not to be a baby. I've photographed funeral homes, abandoned churches, a collapsed asylum in Michigan. I don't scare easy. But there was something wrong with Glen Rio. Not scary like a haunted house or a spooky graveyard. More like standing at the edge of a black ocean and realizing something deep down is waiting. I should have left, but I didn't. I climbed the creaking steps to the second floor of the motel and took a few shots through the broken windows. Empty rooms, mildew-soaked mattresses, peeling wallpaper, all the usual. Then I heard a door slam below. I called out. No answer. Then footsteps, not rushed or frantic, slow, deliberate, heavy. The air felt thick, like I was breathing through a wet cloth. My camera lens fogged up, and then I felt it, cold fingers grazing the back of my neck. I spun. No one there. I bolted down the stairs and got into the car, hands shaking as I turned the key. The engine stuttered, coughed, refused to catch. I hit the wheel, tried again. Nothing. That's when I saw him. Standing at the edge of the lot, half in Texas, half in New Mexico. He was tall, too tall, wore a black suit from another time, something 1930s or 40s. His face was wrong, pale, stretched, like it had been ironed smooth. No mouth, just a faint hint of a nose and hollow eyes, like burnt-out headlights. He lifted one hand and pointed at me, not like, "You there," but like a traffic cop, directing me to go back. "Get out, leave." I yanked the door open and ran, left the car behind, and sprinted down the highway, not stopping until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Eventually, a trucker picked me up. I told him I'd broken down, left out the part about the faceless man and the frozen air. When I returned with a tow truck the next day, the car was there, doors locked, keys in the ignition, no sign of damage, engine started on the first try. My camera, though, gone. Tripod, too. But in the back seat, on the leather, there was a single Polaroid. An old one. Yellowed, curled at the edges. It showed the motel. Second floor. One window lit from within, and the silhouette of a man in a black suit staring down at whoever took the picture. I didn't take it. I left Route 66 after that. Never finished the photo essay. Never even told my editor the truth. But I started digging into Glen Rio. Found a few things, buried deep. Newspaper clippings, strange deaths. A couple of travelers in the 50s who disappeared without a trace. Last seen refueling at the Texaco.